The moment the stranger grabbed my wrist and pulled me through her front door, the pizza box nearly slipped from my hands. Behind her, a room full of elegantly dressed people fell silent, and every face turned toward me as though I had just interrupted a funeral. Her fingers tightened around mine. She looked terrified, but beneath the fear was a desperate kind of hope. Then she leaned close enough for me to feel her trembling breath against my cheek and whispered, "Please don't ask questions. Just smile and be my boyfriend. My name is Beckett Hale." And until that sunny Saturday afternoon, the most dramatic thing that had happened during one of my pizza deliveries was a customer refusing to pay because the cheese had shifted to one side. I had been working deliveries for nearly 6 months, driving an unreliable sedan through the quiet neighborhoods outside Portland while trying to keep my life from falling apart. The job was not part of some dream. It was what I had taken after my father's construction company collapsed, leaving behind unpaid loans, disappointed clients, and a reputation that followed our family everywhere. My father had suffered a stroke 2 weeks after losing the business, and my younger sister was still in college. I had abandoned my plan to study architecture, moved into a cramped apartment, and accepted every shift I could get. I told myself that survival was temporary, but after a while, temporary struggles begin to feel like permanent identities. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unexpected moments that can completely change a person's life. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the trees and flashed across my windshield as I searched for a house on Briarwood Lane. The delivery app had sent me to number 118, but the brass numbers on the homes were partly hidden behind climbing ivy. I parked beside a long stone walkway and hurried toward what I believed was the correct address. The house was enormous, with tall white columns, wide windows, and a garden filled with pale roses. Several luxury vehicles were parked outside. I assumed someone was hosting an expensive daytime gathering and had ordered one ordinary pepperoni pizza for a child hiding upstairs. I checked the receipt, balanced the box on one hand, and rang the bell. The woman who opened the door looked as though she had been waiting for someone who never arrived. She was in her late 20s, with chestnut hair pinned loosely behind her head and worried green eyes that seemed too honest for the elegant cream-colored dress she wore. For one brief second, she stared at the pizza. Then she looked over my shoulder toward the driveway, grabbed my wrist, and pulled me inside. That I barely had time to say that I was only delivering food before she pressed a finger against her lips. Her name, I soon learned, was Maren Whitlock. She guided me into a bright sitting room filled with relatives, business associates, and people who looked uncomfortable even before I appeared. At the center of the room stood an older man with silver hair, a rigid posture, and the expression of someone accustomed to controlling every conversation. Beside him was a younger man in a tailored navy suit, handsome in a polished, rehearsed way. Maren slipped her arm through mine and announced that I was Beckett, her boyfriend. That I should have corrected her. Any sensible person would have set down the pizza, apologized for the misunderstanding, and left. Instead, I noticed the way the younger man's smile vanished and the way the older man's eyes narrowed. I felt Maren's hand shaking against my arm. Whatever was happening, she was not playing a harmless joke. She was cornered. The older man introduced himself as Conrad Whitlock, Maren's uncle and the chairman of Whitlock Development. The man beside him was Pierce Langford, the son of one of Conrad's oldest business partners. Apparently, everyone had gathered for lunch to celebrate an announcement that Maren had not agreed to make. Conrad had spent months pressuring her to become engaged to Pierce. The marriage would unite two powerful real estate families, stabilize a struggling division of the company, and supposedly protect Maren's future. Her parents had died in an accident when she was 19, and Conrad had raised her afterward. He spoke as though that gave him the right to arrange every part of her adult life. Pierce looked me over with open contempt and asked how long Maren and I had been together. Before she could answer, I said 6 months. The lie came out with surprising confidence. Maren looked up at me, startled but grateful. When Conrad asked how we met, I glanced at the pizza box and said we met because of a wrong delivery. Maren almost laughed. It was the first time her frightened expression softened. For the next hour, I sat at a long dining table beneath a crystal chandelier while sunlight streamed through the windows and illuminated china plates, silver utensils, and arrangements of white lilies. The pizza remained unopened on a side table, becoming the silent witness to the strangest afternoon of my life. Marin invented pieces of our relationship, and I supported them whenever her voice faltered. She claimed I loved old buildings, so I spoke about architecture. She said I was patient with her, so I looked at her as though patience had always come naturally. She said I had helped her through a difficult year, and something in her voice changed. For a moment, the lie sounded like a wish. Pierce spent the meal trying to expose us. He asked where I worked, expecting some impressive answer. I told the truth. I delivered pizzas and worked occasional construction jobs. A few guests avoided looking at me. Conrad leaned back as though my occupation confirmed everything he already believed about people without wealth. Marin's face flushed, but not with embarrassment. She calmly said that honest work mattered more than inherited status. The room became very quiet. That was when I realized this was about more than avoiding an unwanted engagement. Marin was fighting for the right to belong to herself. After lunch, she pulled me into a sunlit hallway and apologized. She said Pierce had arrived that morning with a ring and a prepared announcement. Conrad had invited witnesses because he believed public pressure would make it impossible for her to refuse. Marin had panicked. Her best friend, who had promised to pretend to be dating her, had gotten stuck at an airport. When the doorbell rang, she acted without thinking that I asked why she had not simply told them no. Her expression became distant. She explained that Conrad controlled the trust left by her parents until her 30th birthday, which was still 18 months away. He also controlled the non-profit housing initiative she had built inside the family company. If she openly rebelled, he could close the program, dismiss her employees, and cancel several projects designed to provide affordable apartments for struggling families. She was not afraid of losing money. She was afraid of losing the work that gave her grief a purpose. That I understood that kind of fear. My father had built houses for 30 years before one dishonest partner disappeared with company funds. When the business failed, people blamed my father. They did not care that he had sold his truck and emptied his retirement account trying to repay workers. They only saw a ruined name. I knew what it felt like to carry responsibility for other people while pretending not to be exhausted. Marin asked me to stay until the gathering ended. She offered to pay me enough to cover a month of deliveries. Pride made me refuse at first, but then she told me she was not trying to buy me. She was asking for help because she had no one else. There was something painfully familiar in the way she said it. I had used those same words at the hospital when my father's insurance refused part of his rehabilitation costs. That I agreed, but I told her there would be one condition. She had to stop acting frightened around Pierce. A fake relationship would not protect her if everyone could see she still believed they owned her choices. She needed to speak as though her life belonged to her, even if her voice shook. For the rest of the afternoon, we played our roles. We walked through the garden while relatives watched from the terrace. Marin told me about the housing program she had created after meeting a widow who was raising 3 children in a motel. I told her about the sketches I still kept in a drawer, designs for affordable homes that could be built with lower-cost materials without feeling cheap or temporary. Her eyes brightened. She asked questions no one had asked me in years. What kind of neighborhoods did I imagine? How could old warehouses be converted into apartments? Did I still want to become an architect? I had stopped saying that dream aloud because dream sounded foolish when medical bills covered the kitchen counter. Yet speaking to Marin made it feel possible again. As the guests began leaving, Pierce cornered me near the driveway. The afternoon sun reflected sharply from the polished hood of his car. He told me he knew I was lying and offered me money to disappear. When I refused, he smiled and said people like me always had a price. He had researched my name during lunch and discovered my father's failed company. He mentioned the debts, the lawsuits, and my unfinished degree as though listing evidence at a trial. For a moment, shame pressed down on me. Then I remembered my father relearning how to walk between two parallel bars, sweating with effort while apologizing for becoming a burden. I remembered my sister studying at the hospital cafeteria because she refused to drop out. We were struggling, but we were not worthless. That I told Pierce that losing money did not make someone a failure, but using money to control people did. His expression hardened. He warned me that Marin would eventually understand that affection could not pay for the life she was accustomed to. I answered that if she chose him only because she was afraid, he would never know whether she loved him. That truth seemed to wound him more deeply than any insult. Conrad asked to speak with Marin in the library before we left. Through the partly open door, I heard him accuse her of humiliating the family. He said Pierce could protect the company and give her security. Marin responded that what he called security felt like a locked room with expensive furniture. Conrad threatened to shut down her housing program. I stepped inside before I could reconsider. I told him that Marin's projects were not charity decorations for the family brand. They were valuable investments in communities. I spoke about vacant commercial buildings, modular construction, shared green spaces, and practical designs that could reduce costs. Conrad listened with visible irritation at first, but gradually his expression changed. He asked where I had learned those ideas. I told him I had studied architecture for 3 years and worked construction since childhood. Marin placed a folder on Conrad's desk. It contained plans for a development she had been trying to get approved for almost a year. The design firm had estimated costs far beyond the program's budget. I studied the drawings and immediately saw unnecessary structural choices that made the project expensive. I pointed out several possible revisions. Conrad asked more questions. For the next 40 minutes, the fake boyfriend, the reluctant heiress, and the controlling businessmen stood around a desk discussing building materials and zoning instead of marriage. By the time we left the library, Pierce had gone. Outside, the sky was still bright, although the afternoon had softened into golden light. Marin walked me toward my car. The pizza was cold, the customer had called the restaurant 3 times, and my manager had sent several angry messages. I expected Marin to laugh about the absurdity of it all. Instead, tears gathered in her eyes. She said no one had ever stepped into a room for her without expecting something in return. I reminded her that I had originally stepped into the room because she physically dragged me inside. She laughed through her tears, and the sound felt warmer than the sunlight around us. She insisted on paying for the pizza and the trouble with my job. I accepted only the cost of the order. Before I left, she asked whether she could call me. I assumed she wanted to maintain the story for a few days. I gave her my number, telling myself that was all it meant. The next morning, Marin called to say Conrad wanted me to review the housing plans as a paid consultant. I thought it was another rescue arrangement, but Conrad himself later called and made it clear that he did not offer opportunities out of gratitude. He believed my suggestions could save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I began working evenings after deliveries, reviewing blueprints at Marin's office and visiting construction sites during the day. Weeks passed. The fake relationship became unnecessary, yet Marin continued finding reasons for us to meet. Sometimes we discussed the project. Sometimes we ate lunch on the steps of an unfinished apartment building. Sometimes she came with me to my father's rehabilitation center and listened to his stories about houses he had built. She treated him with dignity, never pity. My father began smiling more when she visited. Marin also helped me understand that accepting support was not the same as surrendering independence. Through the consultant position, I earned enough to reduce my delivery shifts and re-enroll in evening architecture classes. She did not pay my tuition or solve my family's problems. She simply opened a door and trusted me to walk through it, but our growing closeness frightened both of us. I worried that she was confusing gratitude with love. She worried that I would always see her as the desperate woman who had used me to escape her family. We avoided naming what was happening until the day Pierce returned. He appeared at the groundbreaking ceremony for Marin's first approved housing development. Families, employees, and local reporters gathered beneath a clear blue sky. Pierce approached Marin before the speeches and quietly told her that Conrad's company was facing a major financial investigation. He offered to make the problem disappear if she reconsidered the engagement. Marin looked shaken. The housing project could collapse. Hundreds of families could lose promised homes. For a painful moment, I saw the old fear return to her eyes. Then she looked toward the construction workers, the future tenants, my father sitting proudly in the front row, and the students from my architecture class who had volunteered to help with community designs. She told Pierce no, she said she would rather rebuild honestly from nothing than protect a company through another arrangement that treated her like property. Pierce warned her that she might lose everything. Marin answered that everything worth keeping was already standing around her. The investigation later revealed accounting violations committed by one of Conrad's senior executives, not Conrad himself. The company suffered, but it survived. Conrad stepped down as chairman and allowed an independent board to take control. For the first time, Marin was free to lead the housing program without family pressure. After the ceremony, she found me inside the unfinished framework of what would eventually become the community center. Sunlight fell through the open beams, painting bright lines across the concrete floor. She said she had spent her life believing love arrived with conditions, contracts, and consequences. Then a tired man carrying a cold pizza had shown up at the wrong door and reminded her that kindness could be immediate and uncomplicated. I told her the truth I had been afraid to admit. I had not stayed that first day because I felt sorry for her. I stayed because, in the moment she grabbed my hand, I recognized someone who was trying to remain strong while silently begging not to face everything alone. Marin stepped closer and asked whether I was still pretending to be her boyfriend. That I said I had stopped pretending a long time ago. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a meaningful comment, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. Your support helps stories about compassion, courage, and second chances reach people who may need them most. A year later, the first families moved into the Briarwood community homes. My father, walking with a cane, attended the opening. My sister graduated from college. I completed another year of architecture school while continuing to work with Marin's team. The company never regained all its former wealth, but it gained something better. A reputation built on honest work rather than powerful names. Marin and I returned to the house where we first met on the anniversary of that strange delivery. Conrad no longer lived there, and the property had been converted into a training center for young people entering construction and design. We stood near the front door beneath the same brass bell. She smiled and asked what I thought would have happened if I had found the correct address that day. I told her someone else would have received a hot pizza, and I would have missed the best mistake of my life. Before the story ends, comment, the wrong door can lead to the right life. If you believe unexpected moments sometimes guide us exactly where we are meant to be. Marin reached for my hand, but this time she did not pull me anywhere. She simply held it while the afternoon sun warmed the stone walkway and the sound of students working filled the building behind us. I understood then that second chances do not always arrive as grand miracles. Sometimes they arrive in an old car, wearing a delivery uniform, carrying the wrong order to the wrong house. Sometimes they look like fear asking for help. Sometimes they begin with a lie spoken in desperation and become the most honest thing two people have ever known. And sometimes, when life closes every door you plan to enter, all it takes is one mistaken doorbell to finally bring you home.